Welcome to the Nausea River podcast. I'm Theo Morgan, and I know I've defended the humble opening act on this show before. Whether I'm going in blind to it, or as a fan, or even as a hater, the opening act is an integral part of the show-going experience. And especially this year, as almost 60 opening acts graced my ears. Most were great, some were incredible, a few were lackluster, and there's only one I wish I missed. Where do they sit in the ranking? I didn't want to do a numbered list, but categories formed, and here we are now. I am going to set some ground rules on what counts as an opening act. I didn't count any set from a festival like Tough Luck or a showcase event like an Evening of Dark Arts in Providence. There can be clear headliners at a festival, but the list was getting long without them. Plus, a lot of the festival entries ended up on this list anyways because they opened at a regular show at some point. There are other acts that were billed more as co-headliners than anything, or at least got a very generous set time. For the record, these were Septic Flesh, Horrendous, Dark Tranquillity, Starcrawler, Pharmacon, and Pathogenic, playing a very big second fiddle to Decapitated, Tomb Mold, Amorphous, Boris, Uniform, and Averst, respectively. All but Starcrawler would have been the highest tier for what it's worth, and Starcrawler were no slouches either. On the other hand, sometimes it came down to if a band was replaceable on the tour, which put Bat and Piron on the list of openers. Sometimes it was simply down to vibes. If you saw any of these shows and disagreed, well, my email address is in the show and episode description. This shouldn't be hard to correct. We have a long journey ahead, so let's not dawdle around for too long. I'd like to start by honoring our fallen heroes, the bands who were supposed to be there, but weren't. This is a shockingly small list for what it's worth. But let's pour one out for The Keening, Prayer Position, 5.5 Rats, and Monuments. The Keening were scheduled to open for Pallbearer in June, and were the big sell for me, as it turns out. It's the solo project of Rebecca Vernon, known a little better for being in Sub Rosa, and I was such a big fan of Sub Rosa that I'll forever follow where she goes, even if it's very different from her sludge metal roots. Excitement mounted, only for them to cancel their slot at the Sinclair day of. Thankfully, I do like Pallbearer a lot too, but it was shrouded in mystery. One of my friends alleged it was a political disagreement with the Sinclair or their parent company over them booking a pro-Israel act or event. If it's true, I commend Vernon for putting a good moral stance ahead of a paycheck. On the other hand, I never found confirmation of this, especially not on Vernon's pages, and that's why I still go to Sinclair shows on occasion. Prayer Position and 5.5 Rats were on the bill for Crowless, only to also disappear day of. One of my friends alleged it was to keep the show from going too late while still promising Crowless their 2-hour set. Plausible? For sure. And Monuments was originally going to be supporting Leprous on their US tour in September, but bowed out for health reasons, to be replaced by Fight the Fight and The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die. At least that story doesn't end on a cliffhanger. Forget the bands that weren't there. What about the self that wasn't? If I was a more casual concert goer, this would probably be a funny story about being late to a show and missing some openers. But I'm infamous for how early I am, foregoing meals to queue up before anyone else, and being precious about being up front. There are no exceptions to this. Instead, it's a story about having a concussion and being physically there for Peeling Flesh and Jesus Piece, but mentally absent. They both opened for Sanguisugabogg in May. By the time Peeling Flesh got on stage, my body slouched over the barricade while my mind turned into soup for a few hours. I have zero memory of either set. I have multiple friends I met later who, unbeknownst to me, were in the same room and creaming their pants over finally catching Peeling Flesh live. No Jesus Piece superfans yet. And yeah, I get it. I listened to the G-Code when it dropped, and it's some solid slam death metal, really dark and filthy. The only reason they don't get the award for having the best album out of Oklahoma City this year is because of Chatpile's newest. But hey, they're coming back in March at least, and my tallest friend will be there to protect me. The only thing worse than missed opportunities and FOMO is, well, the actual bad stuff you endure. There's a lot more good this year than bad, but someone's gotta be the year's ultimate stinker. To the shock of many, I was hesitant to go to too many concerts this spring. It was a lingering artifact from pandemic-induced anxiety, a sign that I still had progress to make after eating at a restaurant without vomiting in the parking lot because I got nervous. So being less than 2 weeks out from my last concert, I had no plans to see Sanguisugabog at the Paradise until the evening before. Before then, I wistfully looked at the listing on the Crossroads Presents site and muttered, too soon. A friend of mine, who was scheduled to work at the venue that night, was dreading it, but he told me to go as a Sanguisugabog fan. But you heard the intro. I got a concussion at that show. I got a concussion so bad that I blacked out for a moment. I couldn't coherently speak for an hour. I could barely turn my head. I didn't look at my phone until the next morning. Obviously, I survived, but I walked back to my lodging that night only to spend the whole night awake, deathly afraid of dying in my sleep. People die this way, don't they? People go to the ER over this, but for a variety of frivolous reasons, not I. I stayed inside the venue until the end, got my senses back by the time Sanguisugabog had us play Murder Ball, and then drank a couple Red Bull vodkas afterwards, the sort of bad idea that made me go sober a week later. Maybe it just wasn't survival instincts keeping my eyes open. Here's the thing. I wouldn't put a band in the worst opener of 2024 spot if I simply got injured during their show. After all, I was already warned about the crowd, who certainly were living up to the hype, forming a wide circle in the center of the room. It's easy to be stupid and then face the consequences. I have a whole filler episode planned about my greatest blunders. But that time, I nestled myself into a barricade spot off to stage left, away from the worst of the attendees. No drinking during the show, which was a new and shocking thing at the time, and no other substances either. Gag took to the stage. They're a hardcore band from Seattle, and a fitting opener for the Bog. Though, musically, I didn't think they were anything to write home about either. But I give every opener my respect. I watched every member on stage. I wasn't busying myself on my phone. In fact, I didn't even take pictures at that show, something I'm a lot more insufferable about getting now. It happened in an instant, halfway or 2/3 through the set. Their bassist, I'm pretty sure anyways, did a sudden stage dive off stage left. His foot kicked my face and neck hard, and the next thing I remember was being slumped over the shoulder of a teenager to my left, and one of the security guys asking me if I was okay. I gave him a weak thumbs up, which perhaps was the wrong decision. And so I sit here, writing and narrating a mostly coherent podcast after all that. There is no permanent damage, which I'm endlessly thankful for. So what's the harm? All Gag wanted to do was have fun on the last night of their tour, but then again, all I wanted to do was enjoy some extreme music, and I couldn't. It's easy to blame myself for not reacting fast enough or simply for going to such an extreme show, for being a metalhead and sympathetic to hardcore. In another venue, I take it as a mutually understood risk, but the Paradise is a lot more secure and corporate, the sort of place where the crowd can hurt me from behind, and that's the extent of it. I've seen musicians go into the crowd there this year, even jumping into the awaiting arms of the crowd, but it's usually gentle and telegraphed. Maybe everyone else in the crowd is better at handling it than I am. But at the end of the day, I only have the perspective of an attendee, a hurt and bitter one. I was hesitant to write this because I don't want to tarnish anyone's reputation. My dream is for Crossroads Presents to one day treat me as a member of the press for having this podcast. So of course, security was doing their job by focusing on the crowd instead of the stage. Gag is a band of otherwise decent fellas who made a reckless mistake, and I can't dodge for shit. Still was a pretty bad concert experience, though. Not for me, but it's not that serious. Making music I don't enjoy isn't a crime. It doesn't even ruin the show, it just means I'm a little less engaged while waiting for the next act. I'm a big advocate for respecting opening acts, giving your golf claps and approving nods even if it kinda sucks. And for the record, most of these bands don't suck. Maybe Frog did a little. Frog opened for Dry Cleaning at the end of June. The tight, post-punk meets spoken word of Dry Cleaning getting introduced by a quirky, twee, even kind of sloppy indie folk duo. They weren't offensive by any means, but there is the feeling that they were not seasoned enough to be playing at the Paradise either. My dad and I weren't impressed, but when I went to pee after the show, some of the girls in back of me in the line were talking about how Dry Cleaning was fine, but they were really there for Frog. It's what inspired this tier name. The worst part is being a little mean towards bands composed of truly kind people. The members of Bat and Mugshot were wandering around their respective venues before showtime, saying hello to whoever they could. Bat was the support act for Necrot for their show at the end of June. They played standard thrash metal, which meant that I found it kinda one-note and hard to tell the songs apart. At least they got the very tame crowd at Sonya going. Mugshot, opening for Unity TX at the beginning of October, were perhaps the platonic ideal of what Gag's set could have been. I didn't get hurt, that's what I'm saying. I left Brighton Music Hall without so much as a headache. It was just standard hardcore, which is fine, but I didn't find their performance very engaging even for the genre. What about two lackluster openers back-to-back? Vomit Forth and Angel Maker were brought to open for Dying Fetus and the Black Dahlia murder. They're death metal meets hardcore, which might be deathcore, but I think there's a nuanced distinction there. Perhaps it's my mindset weighing me down, patiently waiting for Baltimore's granddaddies of brutal death metal to take stage, but realizing what else they influenced too. Maybe my trek to the Palladium had worn me out too much for openers. Vomit Forth gave the tour some New England rep, as they come from Connecticut, and Angel Maker's gimmick of two vocalists is pretty entertaining. Compared to two giant headliners and Spite having a more memorable style, I found it a little forgettable. But at least Vomit Forth tours so consistently that I know they'll get a second and third and fourth chance with me. Finally, I think Fight the Fight suffered the most in hindsight. In the moment, I thought they were fun and a little interesting. In hindsight, you're not only opening for Leprous, but your other partner on tour is The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die. Yeah, your name is easier to say, but I was feeling the need for emo mathcore a lot more. Fight the Fight specialize in proggy metalcore, perfect for bigger fans of, Northlane than someone like me. The energy at the show was weird, very serious and reserved, probably preparing for Leprous. I don't hate Fight the Fight. Now that I write this, I'd like to see them on a different tour. And hey, imagine being introduced so close to the beginning of my episode, and having such a light and open-ended verdict. Things will only go up from here. Cucked by production. I wish I didn't have to say it. The only true victim is Blackwater Holy Light, the reigning queens of Dune metal. The queens of bangers for both metalheads and your boomer parents to enjoy. I've spoken about it before, but even if I brought my earplugs, I think the mix was way too uneven. Again, I don't condone going to a show without ear protection, and my 3 or so months of using earproof have been fantastic. But when I went into a venue bare, I could still hear voices just fine for the most part, even at the Middle East. They deserved better. Better on the album, but take it from me, try to see Street Tombs live if they come to your area regardless. I thought they were a little flat and unengaging when opening for Necrot at Sonya, which is a shame, because they were my favorite recorded artist of the 3 that night. Reclusive Decay is a must-listen. What happened that night? Blame it on off days or bad vibes, or even the crowd standing still when there should have been a circle pit. Street Tombs play a very satisfying blend of death metal and crust punk, and they're the only band from New Mexico that I can name off the top of my head. Well, at least my friends had a great time. The best side effect of this podcast is, in fact, the friendships, and it's not all former interview subjects who found me to be charming. It's the confidence gained by speaking into a mic every week that extends out to the poor captive audience of bored metalheads queuing or standing at the barricade with me. So the friends I've made have generally been people I strongly share music tastes with. This isn't some elitist gatekeeping of my social circle. It's an expected side effect of my main social outlet being concerts. In an alternate timeline, I'm better at making friends at work, or I join a book club and the tastes shift dramatically from there. Usually, I'm the first to find out about a show, but my friend Cameron invited me to see Crown Magnetar at the Middle East earlier in December. It was pretty early in our friendship, when I was still figuring out the basics about him. He was in it for the openers, namely Larcenia Row and Extermination Dismemberment. I was in it to see if Crown Magnetar was still selling the infamous baked beans shirt, which they weren't. And of course, I was really in it for quality time with my buddy. Enter Larcenia Row and Extermination Dismemberment, and Extortionists too, all sit comfortably in a spectrum of MySpace deathcore and slamming brutal death metal. Everyone had disgusting breakdowns and encouraged absolute degenerate behavior in the pit, and my friend was having the time of his life. Cameron's an absolute ray of sunshine, the kind of guy whose joy and laughter and smile is infectious like COVID. So I don't know how I would have felt without him there. If I was a mosh pit warrior, or at least if I wasn't withering away in my 30s, maybe this would have landed in a higher tier. I'd see them again if it made sense, but again, it probably only makes sense with Cameron. Real fans of Nausea River know about my mom, Patricia, a noted Lemonheads fan. Evan Dando held it together for long enough to actually put on a good show, which we agreed upon. But what about the openers? Lucy, parentheses search for Cooper B. Handy, was interesting at least. A duo of a percussionist and their vocalist, who I think handles the samples and backing tracks too. We were up in the mezzanine and I could barely see what was going on, so forgive me if that's not accurate. Now, I thought that sounded like a happier, quirked-up 21 Pilots, which isn't my jam at all, but somehow my mom loved it. And I'm going to be honest, this never happened, so I guess I loved it too. Okay, I didn't go to this concert with a friend, but one guy next to me at the Dying Fetus and Black Dahlia Murder Show wanted my barricade spot so he could see Spite's set, and he'd give it back to me right afterwards for Dying Fetus. He was extremely nice and notably very short, even a little more than I am, so I sympathized with him pretty hard and let him cozy up next to me. Spite would have ended up in a worse tier with their friends Vomit Forth and Angel Maker, but their frontman, Darius Tirani, is one hell of a performer. I loved his voice and manic movements and even immature shit like making a wanking motion with his microphone. Maybe I just thought he was hot with his long wavy hair and half-open coveralls. But most of all, that guy indeed gave me my barricade spot back, so I couldn't be harsher on Spite in hindsight. Good in the moment. The many bands that I liked live that I still don't elect to listen to. It's not a final judgment, even, just how things went. This whole list could change with the right album and hype from my friends, or whatever would get me to listen to them. Everyone listed here put on a damn fine show and is worth catching live. Let's not get twisted. You might actually like them a lot. There's just usually not a ton to think about or say. Soft Blue Shimmer and Soul Glow opened for Touche Amore in November. One mellow shoegaze, one energetic rap-influenced post-hardcore. Both loads of fun. The singer for Soft Blue Shimmer really has one of the most beautiful voices I've ever heard. There are lots of other tours I could picture either of them on, and I'd be happy to repeat it. Frozen Soul oozed stage presence. I wasn't familiar with them walking in, but they're a mainstay opening act who put great value on riling up the crowd and crafting a thick, heavy sound on stage, and all that hype carried over to Gatecreeper once it was their turn. If it's death metal, they belong on the tour, and are perfect for getting a crowd hyped up and making me fear my life. DJ Ulock opened for Lotus in October, taking the jam music concept and applying it to an open-ended 45-minute DJ set. With a dance partner, it would have been heaven, and even alone, I loved watching her build upon each sound. Fires in the Distance is a band to look out for. I mean that. They played melodic death metal with a lot of weight behind it. The whole set felt really fresh, which can be rare in a subgenre filled with a lot of shameless rip-offs. I enjoyed their spot opening for Dark Tranquillity and Amorphous, and then seeing their merch everywhere afterwards. As a New England-based band, they have a lot of local fans who are very proud of them, and I am too. We'll see if another national tour is in the books. Silly Goose was the other opener for Unity TX, and a real classic throwback to nu metal. This is not an era I'm nostalgic for, but I thought their set was very fun, and it made me see the subgenre in a new light. A unique and understandable blend of groove metal, rap, and grunge that only the 90s could have birthed. That is to say, maybe there will be a wider episode on this weird note in rock history. Squid Pisser are unique, the epitome of offensive, low-IQ noise and slutty costumes. Is it noise rock? Grindcore? Hardcore? Shock rock? Maybe some of all. They opened for Gwar, an associated act, for half of their Stoned Age tour. They had to navigate a dark and crowded stage at the Paradise, and their smelly frontman spent half the show among the audience. Do I want to listen to it? Not a ton, but I can't imagine a band fitting a Gwar tour any better. Go Grandpa! This one's a little silly, but it's for opening bands that I respect the longevity of. All of them were in fact pretty good as well, but none were as old as Heretics. Heretics has been a Boston rock band since before my parents got married. They're pretty old, and I couldn't tag them on Instagram due to them not having a big internet footprint. It was a throwback for the old fogies in the audience when they opened for Letters to Cleo, and to be fair, that was a lot of the crowd. But I liked their style enough. My friend Joelle had tagged along as a last-minute invite and said they could shred. Train Dodge opened for Chatpile in November as fellow Oklahomans. Slightly hardcore, slightly indie, slightly prog. They're well established in the Oklahoma City scene, and it was clear that Chatpile was honored to be able to bring them on the road. They were fun, and their only flaw was being followed up by Mama Leak and Chatpile. Sexless Marriage opened for Inter Arma in September, and they've been Boston's kings of noise rock and hardcore for a long time now, and I could have seen them again if I had the good sense to go to the Ken Mode show in October. They have a good gimmick where their frontman does the whole show amongst the audience. You're made more aware of your surroundings at least, and they're all a little strange. Finally, Black Pyramid aren't that old, and I've spoken about them a lot. Their opening set for Glacier was great, and it's nice to see bands from out west in our state draw a little crowd. Newly Minted Fan. It's impressive how high quality the shows this year were. Simply put, every band that made me beg for more. A collection of new music ranging from great to almost life-changing, such as Tribulation. Tribulation opened for Opeth in mid-October, presumably to celebrate Sweden's greatest achievements for the year. Their theatrical approach to gothic metal was captivating, and didn't even require sloppy AI graphics, someone take note. They enjoy a little makeup and let their music speak for itself. There's scant elements of death and black and doom metal, but it's really meant for people who'd be old-school goths if they were born a few decades earlier. I keep telling myself that one anyways. Sub Rosa in Aeternum, their most recent album, ended up being one of the big sleeper hits for me this year once the show was over. Circus Trees got a little mention in my interview with Glacier as they opened at their album release show. A trio of two young sisters and a drummer, they played the platonic ideal of sad teen girl music. There's a lot of poeticism and oddly heavy moments on a sonic level that make me feel less weird about being a fan. It's mature in a way that a lot of older bands can't reach. The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die grew on me a lot after their spot with Leprous. It's a very emo, especially on the record, which I know is a divisive label here, but I like that they sound fresh and unpredictable. But most of all, I was secretly in a terrible mood that night, don't ask, and almost ready to banish them to a lower tier. Then their March 2025 show at Brighton Music Hall was announced, and I gave them a second chance. Maybe more bands needed me to do that one. Morged opened for Horrendous and Tomb Mold. Sentient Horror opened for Oxygen Destroyer. Both get the same paragraph for making solid death metal and being Northeast US legends, with Morged being from Boston. Morgue had the better show and dirtier feel, but Sentient Horror released in Service of the Dead this year, which was extremely fun. Echo Astral opened for Ted Leo and the Pharmacists in June. It wouldn't be a tall order if Ted Leo wasn't such a formative artist for my brother and I back in the 2000s. Perhaps the first true taste of garage rock we ever had. Echo Astral are a mostly trans punk band that named themselves after a line from a Death Grip song. I said their music was good, not surprising. It's noisy and political and extremely loud. Mascara mosh pit is the description they use for themselves, which would probably be true if Ted Leo attracted a younger crowd. But regardless, Pink Balloons was one of the best releases of the year. How the fuck was Cataclysm new to you, you might ask? Probably through losing memories to heavy drinking. And Legion, on the same tour with them, simply never crossed my radar before then. Two reasonably big names in death metal that honestly had no business playing second fiddle to Decapitated for how much fun they were. Not only did I get a solid hour or so of glorious metal and bigger fans of both yelling in my ear, but they were the first live acts I saw indoors in over 4 years. Septic Flesh, the bigger name on the poster, sealed the deal for me, of course, but as the crowd squeezed in and crushed my chest a little, Cataclysm and Legion remind me why I liked live metal to begin with. While I didn't know Worm prior to seeing them open for Gatecreeper, they were probably the best band that night. Super theatrical and dramatic, and their blend of black metal and doom metal is addictive and works off stage as well. Plus, their frontman drank fake blood and brandished a sword. It's cheesy, but it's the kind of cheese I live for. I have to explain Kalia Van Dever first. She is a solo trombonist whose show consists of her voice, her instrument, and a lot of work with a sampler and repeater. Opening for jazz singer Rouge Aftab, it was definitely a different kind of show than I usually cover here. But a big secret about me is that I adore the sound of a trombone. It's not a sexy instrument to play, but the sound is smooth and seductive and warm, especially next to its cousins in the brass section. And even with such low-key music, Kalia was hard at work, having to control the sampler with her bare feet. It came together seamlessly, and she looked like an angel as the spotlight shone on her. Low Heaven described themselves as screamo and blackened noise, among other things, though I also heard some twinges of post-metal. Fitting as they opened for Geary in December. There's not much else to say except that my heart was really into noise and post-metal this year, and it was great to discover them. And finally, Metriphagy and Aegean were the last openers of the year. Starting off the show for Pathogenic and Averst, they delivered some filthy death metal and very interesting prog gent vibes, respectively. I knew a little about Metriphagy because they did the split with Wretched Inferno this year, and also share members with Wretched Inferno. Unlike some opening acts, they even got the Mosh Pit Warriors going from the opening chords. I did get hit, but it was all in good fun, and I didn't even find a bruise on myself later. And I'd say all of this without trying to get new interviews for 2025. It's been a really great year finding out that Massachusetts and our neighboring states have so much good homegrown metal to offer. Nepotism tier. It's not a bad thing. I think about it like this. I wouldn't befriend someone if I truly hated their band, or at least I don't think I could fake it for that long. All 4 bands here are great on their own merits, too. Maybe this is just a stab at journalistic integrity. Tears from a Grieving Heart and 1476 have been interviewed at length on this podcast. If you're new here, I encourage you to listen to those episodes. One's completely unhinged, and the other is actually very smart and structured. If I had to choose my favorite of the two, it's like picking a favorite child, but 1476 are a lot more unique and hard to pin down. There's not much else like their mixture of neo-folk, punk, and what I dubbed American Viking metal. I made comparisons to Bathory, but Korthon has been dead for 20 years. Someone has to fill his shoes. Dysthymia played with 1476 at an evening of dark arts, and then again to open for Burial Oath in October. Now half of them follow my personal Instagram account. They are good, but it was also really weird seeing them in full lighting at Ralph's Diner. If you're listening to DSBM with the lights on, you're a poser, and that includes me. Finally, I wormed my way into the inner circle of C. They opened for Geary right before Low Heaven did, injecting post-metal with the heft of classic doom. Steve, bassist, vocalist, and notable for being one of the big brains behind Summer Gloom, actually recognized me after I said my name. But then again, there aren't a ton of women named Theo, and I've talked about his fest and his friends a lot, but thanks for making me feel famous. Redemption arc. Not every band made a good impression on me as a recording artist. To be clear, I didn't hate anyone mentioned here. I just wasn't very excited for their live show going in, because something didn't click when I put on their music while walking my dogs or whatever. My brother is a fan of Resin, and was intrigued when I said I saw them live. I wasn't walking into the Sinclair with the same expectations, though. They're not offensive on the record, but felt like background music at best, especially compared to Pallbearer. Plus, they had to fill the spot that the Keening left vacant that night, so it could have been a disaster for the scrappy psychedelic doom metal band. They're a lot louder live, and the saxophone playing was glorious. Was this initial distaste a matter of turning the volume up a little more? Yeah, it was. Zetra were the opening act for Zeal and Ardor, and I simply thought they sounded kinda insipid, which is a shame. I like goth music, synth pop, all that kind of stuff, but compared to their headliners in the wondrous Garea, I was hoping their 30-minute set wouldn't feel too long. Much to my surprise, Zetra command a better presence live. Suitably dark. I said Health meets him in my notes, and Health was one of the best opening acts I've ever seen, after all. I didn't become a mega fan of their recorded material afterwards, but I'd love to hear it in a club, that's for sure. Not feeling Planning for Burial should be a sin, but I wasn't crazy about the solo career of Tom Wesluck at first, even if he's one of the most respectable musicians that I can think of. The impressive quality of being a solo act is lost when you're not looking at one man perform. And Tom could have brought a live musician with him, but he didn't. His solo live show is an emotional roller coaster. I finally felt the depression and longing in his music as I watched a barefoot man pour his heart out. It's a must-see show, honestly, though I didn't catch any of the flowers that Tom threw to the audience. Midwife was an artist I desperately wanted to like. She's another passionate solo artist with a lot of friendships within the metal scene, which is how she ended up touring with Blood Incantation. Everyone seems to love Madeline Johnston as a person. At best, I was confused as to why she wrote a near masterpiece with Luminol and then something as mid as No Depression in Heaven. And why hasn't she done a Funeral Doom album yet? I'm waiting. Her live show isn't as flashy as Planning for Burials, even if they're both solo acts on the same label. Johnston stays close to her mic. She seems shy and misplaced among the stage decor for Blood Incantation, but she commanded a nearly unbreakable aura of peace and contemplation throughout Brighton Music Hall. And best of all, I liked the songs of No Depression in Heaven that she played a lot more once I heard them live. Killdozer, the title track, but I still don't really like Vanessa. It is what it is. Headliners of my heart. Who said I was going to a show for the headliner anyways? Some bands were simply equal with their headliners. I like the Infinity Ring as much as Uniform, and Garea as much as Zeal and Ardor, and Primitive Man as much as early Amon-Ra. The Infinity Ring almost made me forget there was no Godspeed You Black Emperor show this year. They take the violin-heavy post-rock sound and breathe folk and goth influences in there, just delightful. Foreboding and complicated next to the frantic pace of Uniform. Garea, well, they'll never best their headliners and make a better album than Stranger Fruit, but they did release Coma this year, and that was some glorious, if very polished melodic black metal. And I've already spoken about Primitive Man. Hot off the tails of their new album Exhaust, Piron were more exciting than Inter Arma, even for an Inter Arma fan like myself. It felt like the event of the year that got criminally undersold. I've talked about their 30 minutes of blistering dissonant death metal, recorded and live alike. I didn't know that Exhaust would make my year-end list, around number 7 or so, and that's simply what they had over their headliner, even if Inter Arma's New Heaven was probably top 25. Dark Funeral was the real reason I went to see Gwar. Sweden's granddaddies of black metal haven't lost any steam in the past 30 years, even if they do look a bit weathered on stage. I honestly find them a lot more interesting than other big names of second wave black metal. They always had better riffs than Mayhem. Hot take, sure, fine. They might take themselves a lot more seriously than Gwar and Squid Pisser, corpse paint and all, but they were about as theatrical with much better tunes. Can't wait to catch them again. Portrayal of Guilt was a surprise. I kind of missed that they were opening for Touche Amore until a week before the show, when I already had tickets. Don't underestimate my ability to be dense. I really like Touche Amore, but given the choice of them and the black metal-influenced hardcore and power violence of Portrayal of Guilt, it's easy to know who to go for. They dimmed the lights at the Paradise for them, and most people around me were shocked to hear what they sounded like. And of course, Mama Leak released my album of the year, and then got on the road to open for Chatpile. It's a fairy tale for fans of off-putting music. I've spoken about their live set, 30 minutes of intense hell jazz that would have been what dreams are made of if they ever played Violin Slim live anyways. There's still stuff to mention. I got a set list. Everyone to either side of me was a Mama Leak fan, something that almost never happens even at another metal show. Most of the time, I get a nod, perhaps to say, well, you seem like you'd be a fan. Max, who I met randomly in Q, turned out to be a Mama Leak superfan who was already following my podcast, which is the closest I've gotten to being a celebrity. No other opener has helped stroke my ego so much. But this isn't a tier list about who has the best or worst show. It's about the meta-narrative. It's somehow always about my podcast. Somehow, all roads lead back to the Paradise, this time on a humid July evening. I had been waiting for the Have a Nice Life show for months, basically ever since they announced it in the spring. They're one of my favorite bands, the sort of music you discover either as an internet-poisoned teenager or a moody adult, finally having the lo-fi, shoegaze melancholy meant for pandemics and drinking alone, or whatever struggles I was having over the summer of 2024, newly heartbroken and sober. It wasn't the best night for me. I went completely alone, secretly fighting through a raging infection and PMS. At most, I spoke to 2 men at the barricade before the music started because Chatpile had just dropped the first single off Cool World and announced a small tour, and we shared the excitement for a brief moment. And then I lost them. October and November were too distant to comfort me, especially when I didn't know how good things would get. It was still July. I missed beer. I missed the man who broke my heart. I missed the Great Scott, where I'd seen Have a Nice Life play in 2019. I went in already knowing Old as Sea and enjoying their music. But here's the thing, I wouldn't put a band as the best opener of 2024 just for playing good music. Old as Sea weren't even the only Funeral Doom openers I saw this year and then befriended. And the last word's the operative one, isn't it? Keep a pin in that. Old as Sea took to the stage. They're a Funeral Doom band from New Jersey, and label mates with Planning for Burial and Have a Nice Life. Arguably, they're one of the most accessible bands I could recommend in their subgenre. My friends at Tears from a Grieving Heart are still filthy and growly, exactly how I like it, of course. Sam from Old as Sea largely sticks to clean vocals, having a voice that I've seen compared to Lisa Gerrard from Dead Can Dance, and I can't get that out of my head. The combination of melodic and atmospheric with crushing and dismal fits perfectly for Have a Nice Life. It's not the black metal records they're waiting for in the mail, but if you want to set a dark and slow tone for the night, you bring out Old as Sea. The draw of Have a Nice Life is undeniable. Hundreds of us packed into the room and mezzanine, whether it was sold to the Paradise's stated capacity of 900 or to something more reasonable. It probably also made for the largest Funeral Doom audience ever, barring festival appearances like the Year of Oaken played for Maryland Death Fest. And it's an odd vibe when you put it that way, but Old as Sea are good live performers, working hard to make their sound fill a space and crush your soul. I could forget about my problems for 30 or 40 minutes and feel even worse than when I started. It might sound like a miserable feeling for the purported best opener, but that was the point. Funeral Doom isn't a feel-good genre, and I needed to face those harsh truths eventually, even if it meant one more night of wallowing in it. But I liked Old as Sea a lot. They more or less did the same set for Summer Gloom a month later, a festival placement that probably changed my life forever. I simply was open to seeing them again, and if it meant And if it meant spending a whole evening at a festival, it's at least the sort of fun I seek out. I figured I'd put my parents' idea of starting a podcast to the test by talking about that festival, and here I am now. Maybe not famous, but fulfilled a lot more. Maybe some other event would have taken Summer Gloom's place in another timeline. And maybe another timeline, the guy who broke my heart would be my script editor. But without Oldest C, it's more likely that I'd have shrugged off the podcast idea and otherwise spent my time between concerts rotting in bed. I'd shyly appreciate bands from a distance and go back home or to my hotel having talked to no one all night. This hobby that's given me so much personal fulfillment would start to feel like empty hedonism. And worst of all, I wouldn't get to bug Andrew and Sam with pictures of my chihuahuas. Yes, they're fellow freaks like me. May Oldest C come back to Boston again and agree to an interview/chihuahua playdate. Until that happens, I'm Theo Morgan, and I won't go to the bar during your opening act. Barricade space is way too precious after all.